All right, we're here to the weekend on Media Row with Justin Miller. Thank you so much for joining me. We finally made it to Friday. It's been a really hectic week, a good week, but all over the place. Was out and about yesterday. Can't speak too much about it, but definitely some things in the works that I'm hoping and really excited to get to share with everyone coming up here soon, but was on The Rush with Travis and Ross twice this week. So it's great seeing those guys, and it's awesome to see what they're doing lately with their own podcast and, online radio show. It looks great. It looks amazing. They've done great work in a short amount of time, and now can't wait to see what happens when it grows. So thank you to those guys for letting me hop on with them multiple times this week. Means a lot. Felt like home, being able to chat with those guys so early in the morning. And, back in the day, 2 months ago, when I was working with those guys, those 4:30 alarms were tough, but I was excited. Every morning I woke up excited to see those guys. And now when my sleep schedule is kind of all over the place with the unemployment and all that, it was like home waking up early, and didn't even have to get up that much earlier, but it still just felt right to turn on a Google Meet and see those guys. And so really appreciate the both of them, and can't wait to see what they do. Got to see a bunch of people at the Nap Center on Wednesday. And like I said, seriously, I appreciate all the kind words. Appreciate you stopping by, saying, you appreciate the work I'm doing. That means the world to me. And saw Sean Roberts, and he's been helping me out throughout this as well. Devin with the images that he's been taking and letting me use those. Those have been great. Alyssa Hurdle at the Des Moines Register, thank you for all the help you've been, and just everyone at the Drake community working with Drake. You've made this transition way easier. And so just wanted to give a few thanks before we started today's show, because we have another big game coming up tomorrow in the Drake world, because we had the men's version of the in-state rivalry. Drake came out victorious in that one on Wednesday. Now Saturday, you have Drake taking on UNI at 2 o'clock. Should be another fun one. These games are always good. In the last two matchups in the regular season, the games have been decided by an average of 5 points. The last time these two met was in Illinois during the Missouri Valley tournament. Drake won in overtime, 92-83, but it still went into overtime. Drake just kind of took advantage in overtime in those extra 5 minutes. And we see that quite a bit. And it is something that has always, kind of made me question. Like, it kind of confuses me of, it's just weird to watch when you have two teams. Take the other night with Iowa State and Arizona. You have two teams going to overtime, back and forth. And one team seems like they just can't make a shot, even though they've played well all night. And then the other team just catches fire. That's always the interesting part of overtime. And lately, there's been a lot more overtime games. Iowa State and Kansas State in the women's side last night, they go into overtime. And Iowa State, I think they only scored like 5 points in total in overtime, and most of them at the free throw line. It comes down to endurance. It just comes down to momentum change. And I wouldn't be shocked if we head into Saturday and this one goes into overtime. These two teams are so well coached and so well balanced, and they match up great. So you have Drake at 12-8. You have UNI at 10-10. It's going to be really a battle Saturday for fourth place in the Missouri Valley as of right now. Now, both teams have opportunities to jump ahead, but you have Drake sitting with 6-3 in the Missouri Valley, UNI at 5-4. And before we kind of dive into those stats and how these two teams just like I said, match up perfectly with each other, first, you got to talk about the coaching matchup. And Allison Pullman has really controlled this in-state rivalry since she became the head coach in 2021. Since 2021, the hiring of Pullman, she's 6-2. And like I said, the last two regular season meetings have been decided by 5 points. They're close battles. We remember what Maya McDermott did a year ago at the Knapp Center. UNI will always make this a battle. Now, Drake has gotten the best of them lately, but it is going to be a battle. And why it will is because, like I've said 1,000 times, these two teams match up well. Drake is the second best offensive team in the Missouri Valley next to Murray State. And we know how good that Murray State offense is. Drake averages about 77 points a game. UNI sits there fourth, not far behind them, averaging 75 points a game. Both defenses are around the same, where they're not crazy dominant, but they are something other teams have to worry about. They're not a all offense, no defense type of Missouri Valley team. They play some good defense, especially on the perimeter, both of them. And both of them like to get out and run. You have both of them who really rely on those turnovers and fast break points. And you have both defenses giving up around 70 points a game. And so Drake, I think, gives up 68, and I think UNI gave up around 69. So you just have both teams that are so well coached, so well balanced, and they know each other. They know each other well. UNI 2-3 in their last 5, but they've had to play up against some of the top opponents. Their last game was a brutal loss on the road against Missouri State, 81-45. Drake lost to Missouri State on the road in overtime, in that heartbreaking overtime, had an opportunity, but we know how they've had to play Belmont, Murray State, Missouri State, the top 3 teams in the conference right now. And then they finally had a game against one of the bottom tier teams where Pullman isn't going to make them look past SIU, but it was one of those, as a fan, you're sitting there and you're going, okay, blow this team out like you should, and don't take anything for granted. Don't go in expecting a blowout because you've lost 3 straight. It's been a long time since we saw Drake lose 3 straight in the Missouri Valley Conference. Don't go in expecting that, but if you go out, you blow that team out, that is going to show you, okay, this is what the team should look like. You can beat teams. It was just a tough stretch. And that's exactly what they did. They took down SIU handedly, 93-66. It wasn't close really at all. Like, there really wasn't any moments where I thought SIU was about to go on a run. Drake just handled it well. And Katie Dennebeer, who we'll talk about in a little bit, only put up 14 points. So that was probably the biggest thing I think that happened in that game. Was it wasn't that they blew them out and it was because Anna Miller and Katie Dennebeer both put up 20 plus. It was just because the team had a good game. And that's what you needed. You needed that breath of fresh air of like, okay, this is how we play basketball. We know what we can do correctly. And this is what the Drake women's team usually looks like. It was just a really brutal stretch to have to take down the 2 teams tied for first right now and then the team sitting at second. That was just a really tough stretch. And being all 3 of those being at home, or 2 out of the 3 being at home, that does hurt, losing all 3. But you now can prepare to take on your in-state rival. You have a win under your belt. It would have been really hard to go up against UNI, losing all 4 games before it. And now you're taking on a UNI team that is coming off a really tough loss, but they're going to be pissed off. This is a team that is well coached, has a lot of veterans on the team, and very similar style to Drake. And these teams know each other well. They know each other well. And, I mean, we've gone through the stats of why these 2 teams match up well. But the main thing I think everyone's going to be watching, the TV crews are going to be there watching, is the guard matchup. That is the biggest common factor these 2 teams have, is their star guards are the best point guards in the Missouri Valley Conference. And they have been, I mean, for the most part of their careers in college. Let's start with Drake's own Katie Dinnebeer, the senior from Waukee. She's first in the Missouri Valley, 20 points per game. She has scored 20-plus in 2 of her last 4, including 16 made threes in the last 4 games, which is the most she's made this season in a 4-game stretch. So she's not only doing what she does best in getting downhill, attacking the paint, drawing fouls, and able to dish it out as well, but she's also becoming a huge factor in Drake's three-point shot game. So if they can continue to get her open looks from beyond the arc, that is just, of course, going to help. So she's made 16 threes in a 4-game span, the most she has this season. And then she's going up against Maya McDermott, the senior from Johnston, Iowa, second in the Missouri Valley and scoring 19 points per game. She has only scored 20-plus in 1 of her last 5. And the biggest thing she does that is better than Katie is she has not turned over the ball nearly as much as Katie has. And in this 5-game stretch that we look at these two teams, because I remember asking a coach of like, maybe it could have been Matt Campbell. I'm asking him like, how far back when you start to scout for these teams, how far back do you like watch? And I think he said around 3 to 5 games he kind of sits in that stretch. And it was Bill Fenley. It was not Matt Campbell. It was Bill Fenley. Because I was going to say, I was like, that doesn't sound right. As I'm telling this, it doesn't sound right. But I asked Bill Fenley when he does, and he said about 3 to 5 games. So now when I'm like prepping for, these games, I kind of do the same thing of you go back 3 to 5 games, what have been common factors. And what has been a common factor for Maya McDermott is she's an offensive powerhouse, and she doesn't turn over the ball as much. Katie Dinnebeer is an offensive powerhouse, but she has turned over the ball 17 times in the last 5 games. Maya McDermott in the last 5 has only turned it over 8 times. And that is going to be key. That is going to be vital for both teams, I think, is just the turnover game. Because like we said, these are two teams that love to force turnovers, love to try to get fast break points. If you can get a 3-2 break, you're sitting real pretty if you're one of these two teams. And it all starts at the guard position from Maya McDermott and Katie Dinnebeer. So Katie knows and when she turned over, like, I had to look up the stat to make sure she turned over the ball 17 times. When I'm watching the games, yeah, there's moments where you're like, man, she's kind of going through a turnover spell. But that's just basketball. They're not 17 is a lot. But honestly, watching the games, they don't seem as big of a factor live until afterwards when you're looking at the box score and you're like, oh, wow, I didn't realize she had that many. That being said, though, you and I will pounce on that all day long. Drake, same to you and I. So it really comes down to that guard matchup. And then secondly, it just comes down to depth. And that's why it was huge to grow the confidence of Ava Hawthorne of the bench players against SIU, because going up against you and I have more faith. I think the ceiling's higher for the Bulldogs bench players and backup players to put up more points than it is for you and I. You and I has about 3 players that put up double digits, and other than that, their bench has really not been as consistent. And Drake, I mean, that was our big criticism of those 3 games against Belmont, Murray State, and Missouri State, was it was a two-player game with Katie Dinnebeer and Anna Miller. And that's okay to go through them most of the time, but for Drake to beat you and I, for Drake to beat anyone moving forward, it's going to come down to Courtney Becker, Ava Hawthorne. They don't have to put up, 20 points. They don't even have to put up 10 points. But if they get around 6 to 8 points, they'll be sitting real pretty. And I'm going through here the notes I have, because I remember going through and figuring out Drake's record with their bench. And right now, when Ava Hawthorne alone scores 6+ points, Drake is 9-3. And the bench against Illinois State, they had 36 points from their bench. So it really comes down, or Southern Illinois, I apologize. Against Southern Illinois, they got 36 points. Now, 20 of those were from Abby Alsma. And you don't need 20 points from Alsma at all times, but you just need to get more players involved, more eyeballs on different players other than Katie Dinnebeer and Anna Miller, so it's not so easy for defenses to really crash down on Miller and Dinnebeer. So Drake, it's going to come down to, for the rest of the season, much like the guys, it's just going to come down to, can you get more from the depth chart? So Drake takes on UNI Saturday at 2 o'clock. The men play on the road against SIU at 1 o'clock. And, yeah, going to have to double box it, basically, sitting there on press row. And I'm okay with that. I love doing that. But it should be a fun night. Fun day, I should say. Should be a fun day with the Knapp Center is always busy during these in-state rivalry games. And Drake right now, they're 0-2 against Iowa State and Iowa, against other teams in the state. So trying to get a win and trying to really showcase their talents and kind of forget about that 3-game losing streak. And now as we're hitting the mid-season point of the Missouri Valley Conference season and getting ready for March, as February is starting on Saturday, is just moving forward and improving. And I have so much confidence in Allison Pullman and her ability to adjust. She's a fantastic coach. The players love her. The players trust her. Her whole coaching staff is fantastic. So I really trust Drake to win this one at home. I think it will be close. I could see it being a one-possession game for the most part of the day. And then around the end, Drake, gets out with a 5 to 6 point victory over UNI. And it just comes down to, I think the ceiling is higher for the Drake women more than it is for the UNI women. But get your popcorn ready. Maya McDermott versus Katie Dinnebeer again. Love it. Love it. Those two are so fun to watch. With it being the midseason point of the Missouri Valley Conference season, I do want to go through kind of comparing, like I did with the men earlier this week, comparing the midseason part of the standings to the preseason. And so right now in the Missouri Valley, you have tied at first Murray State and Belmont at 8-1. Both teams have won 6 straight. Then sitting right behind them in second is Missouri State, who has won 7 straight, the most in the Missouri Valley right now. They're 7-1 in the conference. Third, you have Illinois State at 6-2. They've won 4 in a row. Then you have the Drake Bulldogs at 4th place, 6-3, and UNI in 5th place at 5-4. Now, I mean, it's a battle. None of these teams, I mean, Murray State and Belmont, they looked really good against Drake. But second time around, I think it will be a different story. They could still beat Drake. I'm not saying Drake's going to win those. I just don't think it'll come off as easily as it did in the Knapp Center. But as you look at this, you realize that March is going to be fun, as usual, but not too different from the preseason poll. You look at the preseason poll, you had Drake number 1, UNI number 2, Belmont 3, Murray State 4, and Missouri State 5. Those were your top 5 teams, and those are your top 5 teams as of right now, except the only team they really had wrong at this point is Illinois State. Illinois State, they projected to finish 7th, and right now Illinois State ahead of Drake, ahead of UNI, right there in 3rd place. They only have 2 losses in the conference right now. But what makes Illinois State so good this year is just their starting 5. 4 out of the 5 players have 10-plus points on average. 3 out of the 5 have 13.5 plus. And that is fantastic. But like we've said, and I think every college team would love to build depth, that is Illinois State's major issue, is you don't really have anyone else. Like Drake, there's a ceiling, like I've said. With UNI, there's a ceiling to their bench. Illinois State, their bench is not that good. It's just young. They still got to get experience and height, too. They don't really have anyone to compete against at Anna Miller. The tallest player they have in the starting five is 6 foot. They have a forward at 5'11". So Illinois State, kind of the surprise as of right now, jumping from 7th all the way to 3rd. But, I mean, for the most part, the Riders got it right. I mean, Evansville has not been good. That was their bottom tier team. Bradley hasn't been great. SIU isn't great. Bradley is kind of sitting there in the mix. Valpo, Indiana State. Those teams, I mean, they're kind of just jumbled there, battling for not last place. So, for your midseason review, I'm very impressed with Belmont's perimeter defense. I think that's their strong point with how they handled Katie Dinnebeer. They took Anna Miller out of that game. And then Murray State, they're a team that I'm so impressed with their offense of how they're just able to, they're really just outscore people. I think most games they're putting up around 80-plus points a game. And for Illinois State, like we said, really impressed with their starting five. Missouri State, they just have bigs in the paint that really control the game, along with some really good shooters out on the perimeter. And Drake was so close to taking down Missouri State on the road, just a few shots late that sent Missouri State to win that one, including the buzzer beater to go into overtime. And that's one of those shots like we saw with Arizona and Iowa State. If you're able to hit that buzzer beater, all the momentum flips right over to your side. And most teams can really carry that into overtime, like we saw from Arizona, like we saw from Missouri State. And then with Drake and UNI, I think they're still fantastic teams. UNI right now kind of just inconsistent. They've been up and down. Drake has been mostly up this year, just going up against the three top teams, just did not perform their best. But really excited to see what Pullman is able to adjust and what she's seen from UNI in the last few games, and especially with how close Drake played Missouri State, seeing how UNI just could not compete with the Bears, losing 81-45. Now this is a time for Pullman to see what Missouri State did so well against UNI and try to implement those things into Saturday's game. So Saturday tip-off at 2 o'clock. I'll be there, so make sure to follow along on Media Row Pod on Twitter. Follow along on Justin_C Miller on Twitter as well. We'll have coaches interviews, hopefully player interviews, and hopefully with it being an in-state game, hopefully we get opposing interviews as well. I really enjoyed that with Ben Jacobson and Titan Anderson on Wednesday night. So that is our midseason review as well as a preview of Drake versus UNI at 2 o'clock. Really excited for the weekend. Drake taking on SIU on Saturday at 1 o'clock. Also, they announced today for February 16th, that Sunday, when Drake's at home for the men, when Drake's at home against Bradley, that game will be at 1 o'clock on ESPNU. So Drake, it's so nice because as a kid, Drake just didn't get put on national TV. I mean, once a year, and that was back with like Creighton, and that was lucky if they got put on with Creighton. I think the last time they were on national TV against Creighton when I was a kid was like Doug McDermott's second or first year with the Blue Jays. So it had been a long time. And now, with what Darren DeVries was able to build and those guys able to build, now you're seeing with the success Ben McCollum is having, people want to see these mid-major games. And I saw a post today of Andy Katz, kind of projections of which teams would be in the seed, what type of bracket they would be in. Right now, Drake would be an 11th seed taking on Arizona in the South. And, I mean, with the defense Drake plays, I don't think they're out of any game. Now, if they had to go up against a Tennessee, against an Iowa State, teams that can match them physically on defense, those are the games I'm concerned about. So, I mean, again, way too early to really break down those games, but it is always fun to see your team's logo on those projection sheets. So Drake right now taking on SIU for the men at 1 o'clock. Drake taking on UNI Saturday at the Knapp Center at 2 o'clock for the women. Make sure to stop by, say hi, and I'm really excited to share with you guys next week some really cool news coming to Media Row. So as well, like, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. We will be back Monday for our get-together at 2 o'clock. Live on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeart Radio app, all that stuff. Wherever you get your podcast, make sure you type in at Media Row Pod with Justin Miller. Thank you guys so much, and I'll see you Monday.